Hey, it's Matt, and today we're gonna escape this tank. Before we start the video, I want to let you know I had a lot of camera issues. I recently got a new camera, so hopefully everything smooths out from now on. Anyways, let's get on to the escape. Check, 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 check. So this is actually the first tank I ever built. I made a lot of aquarium lids with glass before, but this is the first time I've actually cut glass and siliconed it all together to make a tank, and I think it turned out okay. There's some seams and stuff that look a little sloppy, but it's my first time. Hopefully I get better as I go along, right? So this scape's going to be something I've wanted to do for a while now. It's kind of a ledge scape. There's a lot of overhangs and ledges you can kind of look over on the hikes around here in the Pacific Northwest, and I just wanted to make that. We have a lot of fond memories. I should say my family and I have a lot of fond memories taking some fun hikes and taking my kids along and having them overlook the edge and kind of just get a good view of the entire area. Obviously, not right on the edge, just far enough to get an idea of how everything looks. So I'm going to be setting up this tank with a modified Walstad method. If you see my other video about the Walstad tank, it'll be set up very similar to that. So we're going to use some soil with some earthworm castings, and then we're going to put some sand on top of that, and then put a hardscape in, and then get planting. I'll also be using these root tabs here as well. The 88 aqua soil I got came with those. I feel like the Walstad method is good, but it says you don't need root tabs, but I feel like they help out a lot, and I think with the sand covering the root tabs, we won't have any problems with anything leaching into the water or anything like that. So we're going to start out by just putting the root tabs in. I plan to have most of the plants just in the middle and in the back, maybe a little bit on the sides, but I plan to have a lot of kind of sparse area. So I don't think we're going to need a ton of root tabs, but yeah, I'll just kind of spread them out just to make sure I have enough coverage. And since I don't know exactly where the plants are going to go, I'll just make sure that there's enough nutrients around the whole tank instead of not enough for the plants. So I forgot to mention these tabs are actually pretty easy to break up. Kind of just snap them in half with your fingers. Like I said, I don't know exactly where all the plants are going to go, so I'm just spreading this out pretty evenly. And I'm making sure the tabs aren't too large. You can also use the root tabs that come in capsules and just open those up and then spread the pellets around. But I have, as you can see, a ton of these things, so just wanted to use them up. So this is just a 50-50 mix of earthworm castings and potting soil. I make the earthworm castings here at home, so I just get them from my earthworm casting bin, but you can also get them from Amazon or your local nursery or whatever. Just make sure it's organic earthworm castings, and then same thing with the potting soil. You just want to make sure those are organic as well. See, this potting soil has some perlite and stuff in it. Um, this stuff will float to the top if you don't cover it up well, so just make sure you put enough sand on top of the perlite to make sure it doesn't float back up. You may find floaters as the months and years go on just because the plant roots might push them up to the surface, but that's okay. You can just pick them out, not a big deal. They're inert, so they won't affect your water quality at all. And I learned this from my last video, the Walstad tank video. You want to take any worms out because they'll work their way up through the sand and can kind of push soil out of the sand and pretty much making your sand cap less effective. So make sure you pull any worms out before you put it into the tank. And for the soil, I'm going to avoid putting it up front just because we don't want to see any soil up front on the sand layer, because we're always going to have about a half inch to an inch of sand and substrate showing at the front, and soil just doesn't look very nice, and there's no reason to have it right up against the glass. Even if you're having carpeting plants, you can put the soil about a half inch to an inch away from the tank glass, and they'll find the nutrients even that far away, so not a big deal. Like I said, this is a pretty small tank. We're not going to go crazy with the soil here. And as I'm pouring this, I'm trying to make sure I don't move around the root tabs I put in here. And some potting mix will come with like large chunks of bark and stuff like that, and you want to take those out or just not use them, just set them aside. Now the Walstad method says you should have an inch of soil and maybe a little less. It says you can adapt to the side of the tank, but it wants about an inch of soil at least. We're not going to go to that deep because we are using the root tabs. Okay, so our soil's in. I'm just going to flatten it out here. Get my little brush and just brush away the soil from the front. If you have a Daiso in your area, this brush, this little tiny like sweep brush thing is amazing. Just makes it way easier to clean the mess when you're aquascaping up. I always make a mess. Maybe you're not as messy as me, but I love it, so. And we're going to use just some UNS Contra sand I have left over from the Walstad tank build. And another tip here is start at the front and work your way back when you pour the sand. Sometimes when you pour the sand directly on the soil, it pushes the soil forward and then you have soil going back to the front, and you just did all that work to make sure it wasn't in the front in the first place. So I'm going to start with the front here. Get the sand about the same level as the soil, and then you can start working your way back. I like just to go back and forth. Some people just pour it in and then even it out after. We're going to even it out as well. I think that's about right. It's always easier to add more than take some away, so you just want to go slow with the sand. I'm going to clip it and make sure I don't have sand everywhere, because I've definitely done that before. And we're going to take our brush again. And this setup we're doing with the substrate is the same you can do with any tank, really. I found this is the easiest to do when it comes to maintenance, because if you try to use sand with aqua soil, the aqua soil beads just end up all over the sand, and then you always got to pick them out and all that stuff. If you only have sand in the tank, you don't have to worry about that at all. You can also cover aqua soil with sand, so you can just put aqua soil in the tank first instead of the organic potting mix we used, and then just cap that with sand. That works just fine too. Okay, I'm gonna make a little bit of a slope here. This is just more therapeutic for me than actually do anything, I think. It's kind of like a Zen garden. So this tank will be viewed from the front where you guys are facing. So I am making a slope back just a little bit. Just check and lean over. Now let's put more sand in there. So you can see the front here of the glass. The sand layer is actually super thin. We want at least about a ½ inch of sand. That makes sure that if we do add any carpeting plants or anything like that, they actually have enough sand to grab onto. If you don't have enough sand, then they'll just end up floating up, and then you'll have a bunch of floating carpet plants in your tank. So it looked like my camera just stopped recording on its own again. So hopefully the new camera I ordered arrives soon and it stops doing that. So anyways, we want to have a smaller sand section up front and then have it thicker going backwards. That'll lead your eyes going back. So that just causes some interest within the tank. So whenever someone looks at the tank from the front, this slope just draws their eyes up towards the top. I put some rocks in here and they're angled towards this back corner, and they're sloped going upwards as well. So what that will do was also do the same thing, was guide the eyes towards this corner. So that really does a couple things. One, that creates unity with the rocks, so everything's going to feel balanced. We're not going to have rocks pointing every which way. You can do that if you want, and that'll just make the tank feel more chaotic. And if your goal is to make the tank feel chaotic or aggressive, then you should have rocks kind of face different directions. If you want to create a tank that looks more unified or something that flows really well, then usually you want the rocks to really face all the same direction. And the same thing goes with any wood that you're going to be using as well. You want most of it to face towards one direction with the flow of the water. We have the rocks facing this way. We're going to add a couple more in a moment here. But that means this section here, this back corner, is going to be a point of interest. This is going to be our main subject, the rock section. But this back corner is going to be a secondary point of interest, just because our eye is going to get drawn towards that area as well. So we know we want to put something back here. But yeah, so the rocks I'm using here are rocks I've just been growing with some kaolin clay. It's just kind of an experiment I've been doing. It hasn't really worked out, but I'm probably going to add more moss as we go. From experience, I know the kaolin clay is going to murky up the water like crazy. So do a water change, and then hopefully it's pretty clear by then. I drew the rule of thirds lines for you guys as well. Hopefully that shows you the balance I'm going for. And the rule of thirds, usually the idea is that you want to either keep most of the interest on 2 to 1, or 2 to 1, or 2 to 1, or vice versa. Or you can also do most interest being at each intersection here. So you can have a main subject here and then just empty space everywhere else, or a main subject say up here that fills most of this, and then empty space most of everywhere else. And by empty space I mean you can have some plants and stuff in there, just not a ton and ton of plants or hardscape. And the rule of thirds isn't a real rule, it's just kind of a guidance to balance out the tank. So let's add a couple more rocks here and see where we're at. It's getting kind of dry. I'm gonna have to spray it down. So this is just Christmas moss. You can already tell I'm probably not gonna like that. Let's try that. Let's try that. Something to keep in mind is I'm scaping from top to bottom, but the tank's gonna be viewed from the front, so I'm gonna go to the front and check it out. And this face of the rock is just kind of too hard. It's kind of like you get drawn here and then you hit this flat face of the rock, and that kind of stops you from going back. So I'm going to try to angle it to be less perpendicular to the front of the tank. So I think that looks a lot better. Same thing with this piece of rock here. I'm gonna see if I can angle it a little bit more. And I'm not pressing super hard into the sand. Remember, I might take these out, so I don't want to push all the way down into the soil layer, and then if I take them out, then that sand cap will be all messed up. So I'm just leave it like that. And in between the rocks, also leaving a bit of a gap here and here, and a little bit right here, and that's so that I can put some plants in there when I'm done. So as you can count, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rocks. Usually you want to keep to an odd number. That depends on if things feel balanced or not, but usually an odd number is a good rule to keep to if you're just starting out. So I'm going to see if I can find a little tiny one to put right there. These rocks are actually salvaged from an old polydarium, so they got some expanding foam and stuff on them. Not a big deal. I'll just cover that up later, or it'll cover up itself over time. Once again, placing the little rock, keeping in mind I don't want a flat face directly towards the front. So I just went back there where you're looking at. It looks like there's a lot of open space on this side, but then when we got on this side, there's just too many rocks over here. So the tank feels like it's less balanced. It's kind of leaning over this way. And we could fix that either by putting a bunch of plants on this side and not putting a bunch of plants on this side, or I could redo my hardscape. I think for me, I'm going to keep to the odd number, but instead of doing 5, I'm going to try 3. So I'll take 2 rocks out. Some high level math right there, man. And I did that, so now there's a big empty space here. I'm going to shift the whole thing just a little bit. We have just a little bit of overhang over on this side and this side. Then you can just see the peaks kind of peeking out. And I like that a lot, so we're going to keep that. And I have this tank lit like a madman. I have 4 lights on it right now just because my camera can't pick up the light very well. But another thing to keep in mind is that we're probably going to have light just coming from the top, and we want to look at the shadows we're making with these rocks. So I'm going to get a light here and add a light on top so we can just see the shadows. So it'll probably be right here. So we're actually getting some shadows. Let's see if I can take my tweezers. Shadows are coming over here in the front and then coming down here underneath the rock, and that's exactly what I wanted. So we're gonna keep that in mind, and you can see there's a lot more depth that's made when we got the shadows in there, and that's something really important if you're doing, this is kind of like an iwagumi a little bit style here. So when you're doing a style like that, you really want to utilize your shadows, because that actually acts a little bit like a hardscape as well. Now these shadows will change as the plants grow, right? So the plants can make their own shadows and change the shape of the shadows and all that stuff. But just something to keep in mind as you scape along and do your own tank. Okay, we're kind of locked in on the hardscape, which is good. So I'm going to push down on the rocks a little bit. Make sure they're set. They're not going to move around. Feels pretty good. These aren't giant rocks, and they're not overhanging or anything, so I don't think I need to glue them, but you can glue them to each other if you want to. Like I said before, we do have some space between here to add some plants if we want to. And I looked at the tank again. You can see that there's a big open space on this end now. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put some plants that grow in pretty thick, and then as time goes on, kind of trim them to lean down, make a line going down into the tank towards that direction again. So we look at this corner. All right, so that looks pretty good. Let's fill the tank up. I like planting with water in the tank, and I find when we use sand, usually that's not too much of an issue. The sand holds on to the plants really well. If you're using aqua soil, sometimes it can be a little too loose, a little too light, and you might want to plant without having water in the tank. Super cool tip is to use a strainer to fill up the water in a nano tank like this. And then we're going to put a paper towel on top of that and then pour the water on there, and then that should help out a lot with dispersing the sand and stuff. So I filled it too much just because I'm going to add more moss. Like I said, I'm just going to glue that on. You can put string around the whole rock and then string the moss on that way, but I'm just going to use some super glue. So I just use a little tiny drop. Usually I try to make sure the super glue is not going to super glue my tweezers together. Usually about 10 seconds is enough to keep the moss there. Let's add some Monte Carlo to the front. I grow this stuff here in a little bin, so I just clean it off. There, it's in with some water and easy to plant with the sand. I say it's easy to plant, and I'm having a hard time planting. Here we go. Monte Carlo is kind of notorious for uprooting itself, so we want to take any long roots we have and really make sure they're down deep. If you notice that it's not wanting to stay, kind of separate it into smaller sections, and usually that's a little easier to plant. Now remember, the goal isn't to make it look full right away, it's to make sure the plants establish a good root system. So don't worry about planting a lot of the leaves and stuff into the soil. You want the plant to stay where it is and be able to make a good root system over having to keep planting it over and over. Looks like the root system of this one's super long, so bundle that up, get that in there. And a tweezer technique I like to use is to push the tweezers down and drag back just a little bit, and then open up the tweezers while I shake them around as I go up. I find that that just gives the sand or aqua soil or whatever substrate you're using, gives it just enough movement to grab the roots of the plant. So like I said, we want to put most of the Monte Carlo up front and near the rocks, but we don't want to go too far forward because we didn't put any aqua soil or anything right there. So we want to keep it back a little bit. Over time, as we add fish food and there's fish waste and stuff like that, This front section will have enough nutrients for the Monte Carlo to grow forward. But for now, we just really want to fill in this empty rock area. Monte Carlo usually likes quite a bit of light, so I'm making sure I don't put it exactly underneath where that shadow area is going to be. Just putting it right on the outside there. As you notice, I put more on the left side, or I should just say my left side over here, than I did over on this side. Hopefully this will grow out more and then kind of lead you once again towards the corner here again. And I'm not putting any Monte Carlo behind the rocks over here because it really won't ever grow tall enough to be seen. So we're going to put something taller back there. Maybe a couple more bunches and then we'll be good. If you buy your Monte Carlo, the root system will be hopefully better set up. The root system I have is a little chaotic, and that's making it a little harder to plant. But usually if you buy it, all the roots are pointing downwards, so you don't have to worry about them sticking out of the sand or anything like that. So I also have some Anubias Nano Petite. It's looking a little worse for wear, but that's alright. We're going to use that. And I'm just going to take a little stone I have, just put some super glue on it. Then glue the Anubias to the stone. Once again, just holding it there for 10 to 20 seconds usually does it. Anubias is an epiphyte plant or a rhizome plant, so you don't want to bury it in the substrate. We're just going to keep it on the stone here. Fill up this little hole with the rock that looks like it's part of the other rock. There we go. When you're using plants like Anubias, you want to keep to that odd number rule again. We have a lot of Monte Carlo, so no one's going to count how many individual we have, and then they're going to grow in and kind of merge together. But with the Anubias, they're going to be on their own, and they're always going to be seen as individuals. So we're going to want to make sure we have the right amount to make sure everything looks balanced. That also means we're not just going to use an odd number, we're also going to make sure we have one on this side and one on this side if we're going to do that. So I have 1, 2, 3 right now. Looks like we're going to have to super glue it to the rock. Anubias always ends up sticking to my finger or tweezers instead of the rock, so we'll see how this goes. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one might be able to just wedge in here. That looks pretty good. Once again, I'm just going to go up the front and check. Almost done here. I just have some pearl weed. This stuff grows super fast, but we kind of want that because of the section I was talking about earlier in this back corner. The pearl weed will want to make sure the roots go all the way down to the bottom. Some people like to do one at a time. I'm going to just do like 3-ish at a time. And we may need to tease these to be upright when we fill it up with water, since we're only a little bit full of water right now. I'm just doing these 2 or 3 at a time, working my way to the other side in a row. For right now, I'm not worried about creating that slope I talked about in the beginning. More worried about making sure I fill in the space correctly. And then once the plants get established, we can trim them up to make them look like they're in the right spot. When you do stem plants like this, you want to make sure they don't get too tangled up, or else it's going to be really hard to fix that when you fill the tank up with water. I'm just not moving my hands. Gosh. I'm moving the plants with my hand so that they don't get too tangled up as I plant the new ones. The plants will naturally untangle over time. I just find it's easier to make sure they don't get too tangled up right away. The key thing with mosses is you don't want to have stragglers make their way in between your stem plants, or else it can be a pain. I actually have some Ludwigia from another tank I'm going to try to save here. Right now you can't see the Ludwigia because it's planted behind the rocks, but it will definitely grow tall enough to be seen later on. And when you're planting, you don't want to put just one stem alone. I think a lot of beginners try to kind of separate out all their stems kind of too far apart. So they do like one here and then one all the way over here and then another one all the way over here. You really want to try to group them up. Over time, you can trim them and then replant the stems. And then that's how you get that dense growth. But in the beginning, just make a bundle and then trim that bundle over time and then make another bundle close to it. And then that's how you do it. It'll make the tank look a lot nicer in the beginning. I think I'm gonna put some like red repins or something. Once again, that's where all your eye is gonna go, towards this corner. So something interesting has to go here. Maybe I'll put some random red things around just to balance out the large amount of red that's gonna go in here. But I don't have those right now, so that's pretty much it. I will add those. Ooh, wait. Maybe I do have those. Okay, I got these as a bonus plant from an eBay order. And I'm not sure exactly which ones they are, but we will find out if they turn red. They've just been sitting and floating in a spare tank I have, so they're not super well grown out. That's not a big deal. We'll find out once they grow. We can always change that later. I think a lot of people are always worried about getting it right the very first time. And with anything related to creativity, I've found you're never going to get it right the first time or even the second time. But after a couple tries, you might get it right the third or fourth or fifth time. That doesn't mean you can't like the first thing you make. It just might mean you want to make another one when you're done. That's called multi-tank syndrome, and why I have so many tanks myself. Because I'm an addict. With soft stem plants, sometimes you can just pinch it really hard and break it right there. And then plant the other one. Boom, boom. So we have, okay, so here's a better top view. We have our pearlweed here, our Ludwigia here, and our Rotala here. I know from growing this Ludwigia, it's going to turn a little red, so that'll be a good transition. And hopefully this is a red Rotala, but I'm not sure. We're going to grow it out. I have some reds coming in the mail. They're just taking forever to get here. Hopefully they're still alive when they get here. And once I get those, I'll add them to the tank. All right. So it's the next day. I got a haircut, and I was also looking at the tank this morning, and I noticed that it was kind of too balanced. I didn't like how everything was centered up. We do have everything pointing towards this back corner still, which is still a good thing. I like that a lot. As you can see, I added some driftwood pieces and stuff like that. But as I was doing that, I noticed there just isn't enough open space over here. So in order to fix that, we're going to shift all these rocks this way. I do want a lot of open space. I want this to feel like a kind of vast area. What we're going to do is move the rocks over, move some plants around, and then hopefully that'll give us more of a 2-to-1 ratio here. So we're going to use these two spaces and then have this one space kind of more open. And you'll see what I mean once I do that. I shifted all the rocks over to this side, taking up these two spaces here, leaving this space here, so it's a 2-to-1 ratio. So now that we have those, we can just create, I like to call these just points of intrigue. So on hikes and stuff, there's always kind of dead logs and stuff everywhere, especially around here in the Pacific Northwest. So that's what these little pieces of wood are. We're gonna just mimic that. They're usually kind of underneath the cliff edges. So that's where I'm gonna put them. And we're still trying to guide the eye towards that corner, but we don't want to have everything following the same exact line. We're gonna kind of make it look a little bit more natural. Everything's exactly facing the same angle, then it doesn't seem as natural. So we want to make things look just a little bit chaotic. Just a little bit though. So instead of lining up the wood piece with the rocks this way, I'm gonna go a little bit in the opposite direction. And this longer piece is definitely going to be something the eye follows, so we're gonna have that go perpendicular to the glass a little bit. Have one pointing towards the back of the tank a little bit. These may get covered up by the Monte Carlo if the Monte Carlo fills in as a carpet. I actually plan to not have it do that, so hopefully it doesn't do that, but we'll find out. Once again, I'm just adding piles next to each other, just like our plants. We don't want to put too many individuals on their own. It's usually a good idea to group some things together a little bit. Okay, so I like that. Now we can add all the little tiny rocks that make things just look more to scale and look a little more real. Okay, I got these rocks just from the box the Dragonstone shipped in. Dragonstone's pretty delicate, so it always kind of crumbles up, so it's a good idea to keep all the broken parts. If you're getting your Dragonstone from a shop or something, you can also just break it with a hammer, and then you'll get little tiny pieces like this. Oh, make sure you wear goggles and put it in a bag before you smash it, because this stuff explodes everywhere. So with the stone, I'm not going to think too hard about where it's going. I'm going to make sure I don't crush any of the plants. If you want to do this part before you plant, you can. And then you can also just, if you do that before you plant, you can kind of just throw the stones around and see where they lie, and a lot of times that looks pretty good actually. But I already planted the Monte Carlo, so I'm just gonna stick these in some weird random spots. And a lot of times in nature, the boulders and like pieces of the rock just kind of fall off of the larger stones. So they usually just end up kind of right next to the edge. So for like this one here, that would be falling off of this. That's the idea. Most of the stones will probably be close to the main stones. When I place these stones, I'm doing the same thing I do with the logs. I want to make sure that they don't always follow the line the rocks or the main boulders are facing. It's okay to have a couple do that. You just don't want all of them to all be facing that same direction. And I think that's actually like one of the hardest parts about doing this is I think instinctually we want it all to face the same way, but in nature it just doesn't do that. Alright, I like that a lot more. Okay, I think you can see that better. So this one has that flat face that's a little bit too abrupt, so we're gonna just tilt it, angle it down, make sure it stays there. Alright, I think I'm done messing with it. I could be here all night messing with it. Alright, so the tank's been up for a couple weeks now, about 2 weeks now. It actually left right after I did the escape, and I was gone for about a week, and during that time there was a crazy algae bloom. Usually when you start out a tank, you want to do a couple water changes, keep testing the water, and just keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't go too crazy. Algae blooms are normal, and I feel like every low-tech tank kind of goes through a little bit of an ugly phase with the algae, and that usually evens out about 2-3 weeks in. But for that first 1 to 2 weeks, you can get some algae issues. So when I was gone, nobody was really treating it. My wife was just topping off the water, and she did a great job taking care of the tank. I didn't expect her to do too much, but algae was everywhere. And she actually called me and was like, "Hey, this tank's kind of going wild." But I told her just leave it, and when I got back, she was right. It was crazy. So for the past week, I've just been doing about 50% water changes every day, and I've been doing that by just taking a turkey baster and just spot cleaning all the algae out. And it was a lot of like brown brush algae and a lot of like, I don't even know what type of algae it is, to be honest. It was just algae you get on the wood, but all over the tank. And you'll kind of see what I mean by the video I'll pop up here. But like I said, I just spot cleaned everything. I took a toothbrush and scraped some stuff off. The moss you can see still has some algae on it, but it's not too bad. I don't actually have any hair algae issues, which is awesome. And that's actually, for me, that's like the worst algae to get on any type of moss, just because it's so hard to take off of it. But I've also been dosing liquid CO2 or CO2 booster every day, and that's not really CO2 at all. It's actually called glutaraldehyde, and that's just actually a cleaner. And what that does is actually doesn't kill the algae directly as much as it does inhibit the growth of the algae. So dosing this in conjunction with cleaning your tank, doing some manual removal, definitely helps out. And as you can see, the tank's looking pretty good now. I've added some Monte Carlo pieces kind of over here. And then I added a little bit more moss, but actually the moss has grown out surprisingly pretty well. And the Nubius actually has some tiny little leaves growing as well, so that's pretty cool. I've also done some trimming to the pearl weed over on this side already. That stuff always grows super fast, and it's starting to look pretty cool, and I'm starting already to make that slant we were talking about. And I've also added some of the Rotala I was waiting on, but that also arrived while I was gone, so I just stuck it in the tank. And this is actually the Rotala grown outside of the water, and it looks a lot different than when it grows inside the water. So over time, hopefully that starts growing out, and then we get some of that red we were looking for. So yeah, super happy about it. Tank's starting to look really good. I think the cycling's starting to figure itself out, so that's great. My goal for this tank was just to kind of show that you can do a lot with a low-tech tank. You know, everything we did here was on a pretty modest budget, and then the plants are actually the most expensive thing in this whole build. So yeah, that's it. I'll keep you updated on the tank. Let me know if you like the build. Let me know if you have any ideas for future builds. I plan to do more themed builds like I did with that Princess Mononoke tank in a bit. I have some things in the works, so I'm excited to show you guys that when they're ready. But I'll give you updates on how this tank goes as time goes on. And yeah, thanks for watching. Take care. Keep scaping. Bye now.